Yeah, I just wanted to finish the digression of yesterday. We were talking about Yaakov Yisrael and the struggle of Yaakov with the Malach, and the question that the Chafetz Chaim asked was, why was Yaakov attacked? Why was it only Yaakov that was attacked by the Malach, and there was no similar attack in the case of Avraham and Yitzchak? And the Chafetz Chaim was masber that Yaakov Avinu represented the koach of Torah, and the Yetzer Hara, the koach of Esav, the richest in the world, is willing to let Jews stay with Chesed of Avraham and Avodah, which is Yitzchak, because even though those are great mitzvos, they do not have a nitzchias, they do not have a continuity, they do not have an eternity, an intergenerational hemshech, and therefore the Yetzer Hara says, let them do their mitzvahs now because I'll get them later. Mashen Kain Torah has a koach that it's mamshech into future generations, and therefore the koach of Esav wanted to destroy Torah. So that's the point number one that the Chafetz Chaim made. He then made a very interesting point number two, that ultimately the Malach of Esav was not misgaber. He wrestled Yaakov, fought with him. There were times he was on top, times Yaakov was on top, but at the end of the day, actually not the end of the beginning of the day, the end of the long night, which is the long night of Golus, ultimately Yaakov is victorious, and Yaakov won, and that's a remez that the koach of Torah will never be extinguished in Klal Yisrael. But Yaakov was limping, so the Chafetz Chaim brings from the Zohar that Yaakov's thigh was dislocated, and this is why we do not eat the sciatic nerve, the gid hanosha, which, by the way, is why it's interesting that in the United States, you cannot get any cuts of beef from the hindquarters of animals, because what happens is, to be menaker, to remove the gid hanosha, which is in the back half of the animal, is very, very difficult. It's a very labor-intensive, and it's really not worth the cost and the time. So it is routine that the entire hindquarter of the animal in kosher shechita is sold to non-Jews. They just sold to non-Jews in order not to go to the tircha of removing the gid hanosha. In Eretz Yisrael, where there's less meat, they actually do remove the gid hanosha, which means you can actually get cuts of meat, let's say sirloin steak, whatever they call it, I don't know what they call it here. Everything is by number. But a sirloin steak, you cannot get a kosher sirloin steak in the United States except by special order. Sometimes you can you can buy a cow and arrange for nigur and the like privately, but you can't get it in a regular commercial establishment. Here in Eretz Yisrael, you can actually get some of those cuts of meat. But be it as it may, Yaakov was limping. So the Zohar says that the symbol of dislocating the thigh is that just as the thigh supports the body, so too those who support Torah are called the thigh. They support the Torah. So says the Chafetz Chaim, Esav had a partial victory. Esav could not succeed in destroying Yaakov. Esav could not succeed in uprooting Torah in Am Yisrael. There will always be people who will learn Torah, even if they're starving, even if they're destitute, even if they don't have a roof over their heads. But the one victory the angel of Esav achieved was that the thigh will be weakened. In other words, the financial support of Torah will always be vulnerable and precarious. Right? That's a partial victory of the Sarei Shel Esav, that the tamicha, the support of Torah, is going to be weak. And al kedei kach, that the Chafetz Chaim reputedly said that any Maisad of Torah that does not have financial difficulties, one must question its authenticity. Because if it was authentically a Maisad of Torah, it would be struggling financially. An amazing thing. Because if you think about it, there's certainly enough money in the world for everything. I mean, there are billions of dollars. How much is invested in movies, entertainments, all sorts of projects, even in university chairs, Chinese literature, or whatever it would be. No, the money is there. So why are mechanchim struggling? Why are yeshivas struggling? Why are salaries not being paid? There's enough money in the world, and there's certainly enough money even within the Jewish community. The answer is, in some ways, this is the curse. This is the curse. This is the victory of the angel of Esav, that the financial support of Torah is always going to be weak. So I just want to assure you, I said before, that Baruch Hashem, you are zocha to learn in an authentically true Torah institution. So you're doing great. You're in the right place. If you find a place that's living off the fat of the land, even if they call it a yeshiva, that might be a question. But Baruch Hashem, even though Baruch Hashem we have beautiful, beautiful new buildings, but we're still in financial struggles in various ways. Now, a person might say, "Oh, so why should I support Torah? That's the curse." In other words, someone asked me to give money to yeshiva. I say, "No, you're supposed to be poor. You're supposed to suffer. Who am I to contravene what Hashem decreed?" The answer is there is a very big difference in a curse and a mitzvah. A curse is simply kind of a declaration of how things normally operate. But Hashem is not saying there's a mitzvah for it. I mean, I'll give you an example. The Torah says that after the Chet of the Eitz Hadas, Chava was cursed, that childbirth would be painful. Might be Eitzev Tel Dibanim. In pain, you shall give birth, right? Be'etzev Tel Dibanim. So in the 19th century, when they began to develop anesthesia for childbirth, to make it easier for a woman, there were actually Christian theologians, they all were men, of course, who said, hey, we don't have the right to relieve a woman's pain. God decreed that she is supposed to suffer. If she is supposed to suffer, how can we make it easier for her? We're violating God's will. And they were actually against anesthesia in childbirth. So what is the Jewish response? What would we say? We would say that God didn't state it as a mitzvah, thou shalt suffer, thou art obligated to suffer. Hashem said, this is the nature I created. I created a teva, I created a nature where there's going to be suffering. But einachinami, we are allowed to try to alleviate that suffering. We're not bound by the nature that God put into the world. We don't say that if I'm doing something that somehow changes the nature, that's wrong. That's why we believe in going to doctors. Unlike, let's say, Christian scientists who say, if God made you sick, you're not allowed to intervene. We believe that, such intervention is okay. So as a result, einachinami, Hashem created a world through the curse of Esav that the support of Torah is going to be precarious. But Hashem also gave us an achrayus to try to make it as good as we can in terms of our own resources and the like. Right? So it's not a stira, because a curse is not a commandment. A curse is simply the tendency that Hashem put into the bria, but then we are mechuyev to try to be masakin it in one way or the other. Okay. Now so those are the 2 points of the Chavetz Chaim, that the Sarah Shel Esav wanted to destroy the Koach of Torah. He was unsuccessful, but he did weaken the financial support of Torah. And by the way, it's not just financial. When we talk about support of Torah, right, the thigh supports the body, so supporters of Torah. It's important to understand, the Gra points this out in Mishlei, that there are 2 different ways that Torah is supported. One way that Torah is supported is by money, obviously. But there's also an aspect which is very important of the psychological support of Torah, that people are machshiv Torah. A person learns, a person gives up a lot to be able to shut up. A person gives up a lot. Oh, it's ringing so much. Okay. Yeah, no, usually it doesn't ring. It's set not to ring that long, but okay. All right. So, I'm sorry. So the thing is that often a person is a ben Torah. There are many, many people who look down at that. They say, why don't you do something with your life? Why don't you become productive? What are you sitting around just studying all the time? And that could get to a person. That could get to a person might feel, chas v'shalom, that they're not productive, they're not accomplishing. So one of the very important ways that a person is mechazek Torah is not just by writing checks, but it's by making a ben Torah feel and understand that they're doing something important, that what they're doing is worthwhile, what they're doing is a zechus for Klal Yisrael. Right? Especially now, psychologically, there's a certain amount of guilt that's circulating in some segments of the Torah community because, well, I'll give you a concrete example. A mother wrote to me that she has two children, two boys. One boy is like, they're a Haredi family, but one boy is a Haredi guy in yeshiva, learning, doesn't go to the army, and very, very proud of him, that he's a ben Torah, growing, steiging, working hard, etc. Then she has another son who historically she looked at as off the derech. Off the derech, he became a little bit more modern. He went to the army, again, let's say a year ago, 2 years ago, and that was considered to be, not so good, but, we love him, but. But now, all of a sudden, the army guy is the hero because he's Moser Nefesh, he's sacrificing. And what's interesting is that I got from her letter this idea, which is understandable. There was almost a sense of guilt and shame that she has one son that is shirking his duty. That the son in the army, is not eating right and is not sleeping, and every day his life is in danger. And he's a real hero for Eretz Yisrael and Am Yisrael. And the other son, has a bed every night and is able to eat 3 meals a day. I hope I'm being clear. In other words, there was almost a sense that it's really created kind of a mental crisis for her, because what she had always thought and what she had raised her children to look at as the highest ideal is now perceived as kind of an evasion of responsibility. Now, the truth is, I understand the mental operation that's going on here, but you have to understand that it's wrong. Meaning, with all appreciation for the Chayolim, totally, hakaras hatov, admiration, appreciation, not to put them down at all, and forget, not just not to put them down, but to be machshav what they're doing. You have to also believe, be'emunah shalema, that your Torah and your mitzvahs and your avodas Hashem are making a difference, and on a spiritual level, they're even more important than the army itself. The army is the ishtadlus that we have to have. So, particularly now, it actually is possible for a ben Torah to feel a little less important, a little less significant, precisely because, at least physically, they're not going through all the sacrifices that Chayalim are going through. So again, I'm just bringing this out to point out that, as the Vilna Gaon says, the inyan of Hachzakas Torah is not only about money, it's about psychologically being encouraged that you're doing something important and you're doing something significant. You should get that chizuk from other people, but ultimately it has to come from within. In other words, you yourself. That is part of the reason why. If you go back, you may notice, if you look at the old pictures of the European yeshiva bachrim, there seemed to have been almost an excessive emphasis on dressing kind of in a very fancy way. They were very poor. They barely had bread, but they had to, in fact, even the idea of the hat to some way, I don't want to get into the history of the hat, but part of the hat in the Litvish yeshivas was not so much a religious idea, but you were imitating the way a prestigious businessman would walk in the street. In other words, it was actually a way of emulating non-yeshiva people who had money and were well established. And part of this emphasis on dress, which never became so prominent in Eretz Yisrael, actually, but in Europe it was, to be a European gentleman, was that a ben Torah needed a sense that they were a prestigious person involved in a profession. There are lawyers and there are doctors, and then there are Talmudic scholars. I mean, of course, it's more important than that, but at least they should regard themselves as professional people, like all other professional people, and therefore they should have a respectable status in society. Now, obviously, it's much more than that, and much deeper than that. But they needed kind of that superficial recognition to build themselves up, because people sometimes looked at them as, time wasters or non-productive people. Even in Europe, they were sometimes perceived that way. Okay, so that's an important element of what is Hachzakas Torah, to be machshiv, the endeavor of a person that's learning. Did you want to say something?
It was a bit tangential.
Yeah. Well, this whole talk is a bit tangential, yeah.
About Torah, would there ever be a matter today where we would expect people to stop learning?
Yeah, so this may come up in a Q&A, and I think it has come up. I mean, here is the thing. The emes is, there is a category of war that is called Milchemes Mitzvah, obligatory wars. And obligatory wars, the halacha seems to be that everybody must be called to fight an obligatory war. However, some are medayik from the Rambam that full-time students of Torah are patur even from an obligatory war, a war of defense. But others take the position, like the Hester yeshivos, that you have to combine your learning and military effort. And even within the Haredi world, if it really became an emergency to such degree that there was a manpower shortage, which there is not, we would have to go in and fight. It happens to be there's not a manpower shortage. I mean, of the 310,000 reservists that we're in, I think they're deploying around 100 or 120,000, meaning there's a lot of reservists who are not even being involved in operations right now. So Baruch Hashem, there's a lot of people, but theoretically there would be a possibility. And again, I want to remind people, if you haven't heard this before, that in 1948, the War of Independence, Rav Chaim Kanevsky, I mean, he was not in the army officially, but he actually participated in military defense. He had a rifle for a while, and he was guarding a hill, meaning he was a Ben Torah who felt. He also had to participate in the military effort to defend Eretz Yisrael. So there may be possibilities for that. But as I say, as a matter of manpower, it's just not needed right now. And what is needed is Torah, because Torah is, see, it's not just a fake thing. We got to believe this. Oh, that's your excuse. You're learning, that's just as good as fighting. Yeah, it is, even more so, meaning we have to understand the zechus of our Torah learning as part of this military endeavor. Let me remind you as well that even during World War II, in the United States, when it had a draft, and later in Vietnam, of full-time rabbinical students, the United States government exempted them from military service. To be a little cynical, that is why yeshivas had their biggest enrollment in the 1960s, because it gave people draft exemptions. Okay, some of them were not sincere, unfortunately. But the point was that even a secular culture recognized that you need spiritual people who are involved in spiritual pursuits, and that brings the blessings of God on the military endeavor. So even the United States, and this was World War II, which was, of course, a major commitment. Yeah.
Rav, if we looked at it from the perspective of Milchemet Mitzvah, then would it be a legitimate hashkafic thing to say, listen, just like I'll stop learning to go build my sukkah, I want to go out and do this mitzvah?
Yeah, but the difference would be this. The difference would be that you are allowed and even commanded to stop Talmud Torah to do a mitzvah, but only if the mitzvah cannot be fulfilled by other people, meaning to say a mitzvah that other people are able and are willing to do who are not learning, you generally would not give up the Talmud Torah. So as I say, in a case where you're actually needed, then Eino Chinami, that would be a mitzvah that could not be done without you. And then you would be commanded to participate in the military efforts. It's a difficult issue. As I say, Hester has a different philosophy, and there's a lot of validity to the Hester philosophy, that you have to combine a military commitment with your Torah learning, and many of them are great walking Kiddush Hashems. I mean, they continue to learn, they continue to daven, even in the army, and they're also very heroic. Many of them are extremely moser nefesh in the military operations. But the tradition in the Haredi world has been that that still is a dilution of full-time learning, and it's not proper to dilute the full-time learning. What's interesting is, okay, even if there's a full-time Torah learning exemption, is there a Haredi exemption? Meaning, you have to be sure there are two different issues here. One is, should I be exempt from military service if I am full-time Torah learning? That's one issue. On the other hand, there are Haredim who are not learning in yeshiva. They might be working, they might be doing other things. But they claim that because the army is an anti-religious environment, they don't want to go to the army for that. Now that's a different thing. That's not this. You have to be careful not to mix up the two issues. One is a learning exemption, and one is what you might call a lifestyle exemption. And that might be a little more questionable in a situation where it's a milchemes mitzvah. There is a source in the Rambam for a learning exemption, at least. There may not be a source for a lifestyle exemption. So I don't mean to trivialize it by calling it a lifestyle. It's a serious issue. But the idea of, just not religious enough for me. So the point I want to make is, be sure when you think about these issues, you differentiate the two problems. These are two separate claims that the Haredi world is making, and they're not necessarily connected to each other. One is, we don't want to interrupt Torah learning. The other is, I don't want my child to be in an environment which may undermine his religious observances. Those are absolutely two different svaras, and you have to analyze them differently. Yeah.
When you say Hester, are you referring to the Dati?
Yes, I am. Dati Liumi. We don't mention Dati Liumi too much. Dati Liumi established in its yeshivas what's called a Hester program. Now, it has different variations because they're able to make special, separate agreements with the government, depending on the yeshiva, in which over a 3 to 5 year period, part of the time is full-time learning in yeshiva and part of the time is military service. And that way, the Chayal is incorporating both elements. So Merkaz HaRav has a Hester program. The yeshiva in Har Etzion, Gush Etzion, that was Aaron Lichtenstein, has a Hester, and there are many Hester programs throughout Eretz Yisrael. Each of them are slightly different. And again, the graduates are very, very devoted people, very, very devoted people. But that was not the shita of what you might call the mainstream Haredi, Litvisha, or even Hasidish yeshivas. And again, it's an interesting issue to explore. Now, again, just to show you, we have guys in Or Sameach, who have gone into the army, who plan to go into the army. So I think as a yeshiva even, we understand the pushes and the pulls in both directions, and we don't automatically disqualify or disparage it. But on a whole, I think the philosophy would be that a full-time learning is a better way that you can contribute to the Klal Yisrael. But it's a very, very difficult issue, and as I indicated, psychologically, it sometimes can cause shame and guilt, as I gave you the example of the mother, who is almost, it's chas v'shalom, it's hard to say, she's almost ashamed now of the son who's learning in yeshiva full-time when she considers her other son who is in the army. It was a reversal. Like a year ago, she was kind of ashamed of the son in the army, and now it got reversed. One way of looking at it, though, is, you can say that, different people shine at different times. Right? It says in Pirkei Avos, Ein lecha adam she'ein lo isha. Everybody has a certain time in life where they kind of assume a heroic role. So yeah, most of the time it was the guy that was learning that was the hero of the family, and now it switches. HaKadosh Baruch Hu kind of allows each person to assume a certain prominence and chashivas at various times. It's mamish the Mishnah. Ein lecha adam she'ein lo isha. So, in some sense, this may be the hour of the soldier. But we have to know that even when it's the hour of the soldier, it's still the Torah that is working behind the scenes to bring the bracha to what the soldier is doing, right? So there are different ways of looking at it, but psychologically, it's an interesting issue. Okay, now there's one more aspect I want to talk about Yaakov's bracha. Again, the whole thing is a digression, but since we're talking about Yaakov and the angel, Yisrael, so there's another point. Yaakov is pinning the angel down, and it's the crack of dawn, And the angel says, I gotta go, I gotta go, I gotta go. And Rashi explains, because every morning we say Kedusha, we praise Hashem as an angel, even the angel of Esav, and I only get one chance. There are different midrashim how often a malach gets to praise Hashem. This is my chance, you gotta let me go. Now, I do remember hearing from an old Litvisher Rav, Vort, years ago, that this is the nature of Rishayim. You know, when it comes to beating up Yaakov and wrestling, the angel has all night to wrestle. The angel is in no rush to go. When Yaakov asks him for a bracha, angel says, gotta go, out of town, out of time. You know, it's kind of the nature. When it comes to doing something good, I just don't have time. When it comes to rishus, you have the whole night. But okay, that's a little drush out of context. But the angel blessed Yaakov. He said, your name shall no longer be Yaakov. Your name will be Yisrael. Actually, in reality, if you look at the psukim, it's important to note, the angel did not change his name. Hashem changes his name later. The angel is giving up a prophecy that Hashem will change your name. So he did not become Yisrael that night. Rather, it's a nevuah to Yaakov that Hashem will change his name. Okay, but be it as it may, then Yaakov says, Hagiduni, tell me, Ma Shemecha, what is your name? I want to know your name. So the angel gives a very enigmatic response. He says, Lama za tishal lishmi. Why are you asking my name? So Rashi explains that angels' names are defined by the particular mission that they have. Now, it's true, there are some angels with permanent names. Gabriel, right, Raphael. But most angels, whatever their mission is, that's their name. So the angel says, don't ask me my name because I have different missions in the world, and each mission gives me a different name, therefore I'm a man without a name, or an angel without a name. That's what Rashi says, and that's how Chazal understand it. But there's a vort from the great mashgiach of Chevron, Reb Yehuda Leib Chasman. He was actually mashgiach in a number of yeshivas in Europe, and then he came to Chevron. He was the Rebbe of Rav Shvadran, as well as really thousands of Talmidim, but Rav Shvadran was a famous Talmud of his. If you've ever seen the 2-volume Musar Sefer on Chumash, or Yahel, you see it around. Actually, it's probably an underlearned Sefer, but it's actually a very beautiful Sefer. These are the shmuzin of Rav Yehuda Leib Chasman. And he says the following. He says that when the angel says, why do you ask my name? That's his name. He's actually answering the question rather than evading it. Yaakov says, what is your name? The angel says, my name is, why do you ask my name? Now, what type of name is that? And in your prior life, you may remember Abbott and Costello, who's on first? Well, a very classic comedy routine, and this is very similar. Why do you ask my name? So Yaakov would say, well, what is your name? He says, why do you ask my name? Right? It's the same thing. Although I don't think Rav Chasman based his vort on Abbott and Costello. I'm pretty sure not. So what's the pshat? What does it mean? My name is, why do you ask my name? What type of name is that? So Rav Chasman gives a mashal, and I've said this mashal before, and in Ela other times, so you may have heard it. He gave the mashal of a Polish peasant, a non-Jewish peasant, who was coming to the big city, Warsaw, Krakow, for the first time. And he had never seen all the different things of a big city. He was like a country rube. He was a redneck, if that's the term for a Polish peasant. And he was told that if he buys a ticket and goes into this building, it was a movie theater, he would be able to see people and animals coming out of the wall. They would materialize from nowhere. So he buys a ticket, he sits in a dark room, and all of a sudden, he sees, I guess it was an American Western, he sees cowboys and Indians and horses, and they seem real to him. You know, they look like real people coming out of the wall. And he didn't figure out where do they come from, because when he walked into the room, he didn't notice any side doors other than the main entrance that he went through. How did they get into the building? So he couldn't figure it out. So he pulled out his big flashlight and he shined it on the wall to see if there's some secret entrance. But of course, when you shine a bright light on a movie, you no longer can see the picture very clearly because the lights have to be off. So everybody shouted at him and they said, "Shut off your light. We can only see the movie when it's dark." So Rav Yehuda Leib Chasman said, it's interesting that he used a movie as a mashal. He says, this is mamish a mashal for Eilam. This is mamish a mashal. Let me take care of this. This is mamish a mashal for Olam Hazeh. When you sit in darkness, all sorts of things look real that are really fake. When you turn on the lights, well, when it's dark, two things happen. That which is not real looks real, and that which is real you don't even notice. There might be right next to you in the empty seat, there might be a bag of diamonds, but you don't see it. So in darkness, the truth gets obscured, and then things that are fake become real or look real. When you turn on the lights, exactly the opposite happens in both directions. That which is an illusion disappears, and the reality can be perceived. I could see the diamonds next to me. So he said, Olam Hazeh is a world of darkness. It's a world of confusion. It's a world in which all sorts of things seem to be important and meaningful that are not really that important. Whether it's the amount of money that you make, the amount of power that you have, whether it's the grudges or slights or resentments that I accumulate against people because of this and that, which becomes so important to me that I can't even go on until I address them one way or the other. And it's so real and it's so important. And then at some point you realize, what is this? So as long as you live in darkness, you're going to look at all of these things as real. And the real things that matter in life, Torah, mitzvos, even the human relationships that we have, don't become that important to me. So what does a person have to do? What do you have to do? You have to turn on the lights, meaning try to get out of the darkness. Try to focus on reality. And then all of those fake things disappear. And then you perceive what is really in life. So life, the process of life, is about trying to learn how to turn on the lights, symbolically, within the darkness of Eilam Hazeh, which is called the world of darkness. That's the phrase that Chazal use, one of the phrases. Olam Hazeh is a world of darkness, a world of confusion, a world where all sorts of things look real, like the movie images, that are not real. So, when Yaakov asks the angel, "Tell me your name," Yaakov is actually asking the angel, "Tell me the source of your power," because here we have to introduce a Kabbalistic idea, that a person's name actually represents the source of their spiritual power in the world. That's why the Arizal says the name that parents give their son at a bris is actually a prophetic revelation from Hashem as to the root of that child's neshama. Now, the parents don't know this consciously. They may be naming you after Uncle Abe or whatever it is, but it's a nevuah. Hashem put it into their head to think of that, because in some ways this is the spiritual root. Now, because we're so impoverished in our understanding, we don't really understand, well, what's the difference if I'm a Yitzchak or a Yaakov or a Moshe or a Shlomo or a David? What exactly is the difference? We don't quite know, but there is a difference there. Like, what is the root of your neshama? It's rooted in those primeval elements. You can touch up the Ari two ways. Is it the pshat that the name is simply uncovering what the root is, or is the name creating the root? Meaning, is the root of your neshama Avraham because you were named Avram, or the other way around? You were named Avram because your parents saw that was the root of your neshama. But be it as it may, therefore, a name represents a source of power. Now, Yaakov is talking to the angel of Esav. The angel of Esav represents evil in the world. So Yaakov is asking a very simple question. What's your name? Meaning, what's your power over people? Why do people fall for you? Meaning, doing Averos, living a life of evil, is just stupid. Because whatever benefit you get from the Avera is going to be so outweighed by the detriment that from a business proposition, it doesn't make sense. And whatever inconvenience a mitzvah entails is going to be so outweighed by its reward. So Yaakov is asking, how do you get people to fall? Meaning, what is your name? Meaning, what is your power over people that they fall for this? Why do they fall for this fake thing? Answer, why do you ask my name? Meaning to say, people don't think, people don't bother to think about it. Meaning, why do you ask? Meaning, people go through without asking any questions. In other words, it's the darkness. The way I get them is by keeping them in the dark. If they would turn on the lights, they would know that I'm nothing. They would know. But they don't bother turning on the lights. They don't bother to wonder, what is my power over them? And then I have power over them because they never notice to turn on the lights. Right? That's how Leib Chasman understands the meaning of my name. My power is people don't ask. People don't think. And the emphasis, this is our nisayon in life. And the truth is, it's a nisayon not only for non-religious. I mean, it's a nisayon for religious people too. Even people, Baruch Hashem, who are zocha to keep mitzvahs. They keep Shabbos, they keep kosher, right? They do mitzvahs. But, far too often we go through it in almost a sleepwalking state. We don't really think about what our life is about. We don't really think about what is important in life. Someone described it once. It's almost as if, instead of recognizing that our life is about 613 mitzvahs, we look at the 613 mitzvahs as 613 problems that we have to navigate around in order to do what I really want to do. It's like we define certain things as important, but I'm committed, I can't do it on Shabbos, I can't do it here, I can't do it. So I got to figure out how to get through this obstacle course. Now, better to do that than not to do that, meaning even if a person is doing mitzvahs with that attitude, that's a much, much better level than just not doing it. But still, you understand what a wrong attitude that is. Mitzvahs are not obstacles that we just get around. They are the meaning of our life. They're the purpose of our life. If anything, the obstacles are everything else we got to do. We got to work. We got to do the other stuff. But I think that's what the Babach Rebbe said by Shabbos. It says, "Sheishes yomim teosem malachtecha." For 6 days, your work shall be done. Now, I hope you can see grammatically, that's a little bit of an unusual construction because it doesn't use the kal, it does not use the active. Normally, it should say, Sheishes yomim ta'aseh malachtecha. For 6 days, you should do your work. Right? But it doesn't say that. Sheishes yomim, your work should be done. It's almost as if you're not doing it, which means he explained it that, yeah, I got to do my work, but it's like secondary. It's not who I am. It's not who I am. It got to get done, but it's not what I'm actively involved in doing, right? So this is the idea of kind of defining what is our priority in life, what is our purpose in life, turning on the lights to recognize. And the truth is, they say that after 120 years, when someone is on their deathbed, They're not going to say, if only I would have spent more Sundays in my office. That's not going to be the final thought. If a person's able to have a final thought that they're going to have. And, all the things, I don't want to be depressing, but all the things that people regret at the end of their lives, there's a tremendous bracha that we can actually fix them while we're living. We can fix them now and not necessarily have all the regrets and the sadnesses later. So this is how Reb Leib Chasman learns. Lama tishal lishmi. If you don't ask, you don't think. That's how I get you, because nobody thinks about what is truly important in their life. Okay.
Thank you for listening to this Awesome Eich production. To find out more and to partner in our mission, please visit ohr.edu.